A widowed mom gives shelter to a lonely biker. But by sunset, 2,000 Hell's Angels guard her house. She thought she was just helping a stranger on a rainy night, offering soup, kindness, and a roof. But the man she brought in isn't just a lost traveler. He's running from a past filled with danger and guilt. Soon, the whole town turns against her. Neighbors whisper. The sheriff warns her. And just when fear takes hold, the sound of hundreds of roaring engines fills the valley. They came for him, but they stayed for her. Now this quiet mom stands at the center of a storm, between faith and fear, grace and judgment. She saved one man's soul, but can her kindness save a whole town? When mercy calls down thunder, will love be enough to calm it? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The desert wind whispered through the mesquite trees as Stella Jensen stood at her kitchen window, watching the storm clouds gather over the distant mountains. The copper-colored Arizona sky had turned an ominous shade of purple-gray, and the first drops of rain began to tap against the window pane. She pulled her cardigan closer, finding comfort in its soft warmth. The house felt especially quiet tonight. Lily was upstairs, probably texting her friends or working on homework. The familiar emptiness settled around Stella like a well-worn blanket. 5 years had passed since John's death, but some habits remained unchanged, like keeping the porch light on every night, just as they had when he worked late shifts. Thunder rolled across the valley, making the windows rattle. The sound reminded her of those nights when John would come home from patrol, his police cruiser crunching on the gravel driveway. She shook her head, trying to clear away the memories. "Mom?" Lily's voice carried down the stairs. "Did you hear the weather report? They're saying it's gonna be a big one." "I heard," Stella called back, moving to check that the windows were properly sealed. The storm was picking up now, rain falling in heavy sheets. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the desert landscape in brief, stark flashes. Through the curtain of rain, Stella caught movement on the road that passed by their house. A lone motorcycle weaved unsteadily, its headlight cutting through the darkness. Something wasn't right. The bike was moving too erratically. As another flash of lightning lit up the night, she saw the motorcycle suddenly veer sharply to the right. Her heart leaped into her throat as she watched the rider lose control. The bike slid sideways, throwing its rider before disappearing into the drainage ditch that ran alongside the road. Without thinking, Stella grabbed her yellow raincoat from its hook by the door. "Lily," she called out, "call 911. There's been an accident." She heard Lily's footsteps thundering down the stairs as she rushed outside. The rain was coming down in torrents now, soaking through her clothes despite the raincoat. The red clay mud sucked at her boots as she made her way toward the crash site. Lightning flashed again, showing her the way. The motorcycle lay on its side, steam rising from its engine in the rain. A few yards away, a large figure lay motionless in the mud. Stella's police wife training kicked in as she approached carefully, scanning for any signs of additional danger. The rider was huge, well over 6 feet tall, dressed in worn leather. Even unconscious, there was something intimidating about him. Tattoos covered what she could see of his arms, and his beard was thick and unkempt. He was exactly the kind of person she would have crossed the street to avoid in different circumstances. But right now, he was hurt and needed help. John's voice echoed in her memory. "Everyone deserves a helping hand, Stell. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life." Stella knelt beside the man, checking his pulse. It was strong and steady. She could see a nasty gash on his forehead, and his clothes were soaked with rain and mud. He was breathing, but the rain was getting heavier. "Mom!" Lily appeared at her side, holding an umbrella. Emergency services say it'll be at least 45 minutes. The storm's caused accidents all over. Stella looked at the unconscious man, then back at their house. The porch light glowed warmly through the rain, like a beacon. She made her decision. "Help me get him up," she said to Lily. "We can't leave him out here." Together they managed to half-drag, half-carry the man toward the house. It was slow going. He was incredibly heavy, and the mud made every step treacherous. By the time they got him onto their covered porch, both women were gasping for breath. "Get some towels," Stella instructed, as they maneuvered him through the door. They settled him on their oversized couch, which suddenly seemed small beneath his large frame. Lily returned with an armful of towels, and Stella began carefully cleaning the mud from his face and checking his injuries. The cut on his forehead wasn't as bad as it had first appeared, though it would need cleaning. She found no other obvious injuries, but he'd have plenty of bruises tomorrow. As she worked, she noticed other things, scars that spoke of a hard life, a leather vest with patches that made her stomach clench with worry. The man stirred as she was finishing up, his eyes fluttering open. They were a startling shade of blue, sharp and alert despite his condition. He tensed immediately, taking in his surroundings with the wariness of a cornered animal. "Easy there," Stella said softly, stepping back to give him space. "You had an accident on your bike. We brought you inside out of the storm." He tried to sit up, then groaned, pressing a hand to his head. "How long was I out?" "About 20 minutes, Stella replied. "I'm Stella Jensen. This is my daughter Lily. Help is on the way, but the storm's got them backed up." "No hospitals?" he said firmly, his voice rough but clear. "I appreciate the help, ma'am, but I can't stay." He started to stand, but swayed dangerously. Lily stepped forward instinctively to steady him, but Stella pulled her back. The man sank back onto the couch, clearly dizzy. "You've got a concussion," Stella said matter-of-factly. "You're not going anywhere in this weather, especially not on that bike. I've got coffee brewing, and you can at least wait until the storm passes." He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to understand her motives. Finally, he gave a slight nod. "They call me Hawk," he said quietly. Lily went to get the coffee, while Stella brought over their first aid kit. Hawk watched her carefully as she cleaned the cut on his forehead, his expression guarded but not hostile. His fingers were curled tight around the coffee mug when Lily brought it, as if he was anchoring himself to its warmth. Lightning continued to flash outside, but inside, the tension slowly began to ease. Hawk's shoulders gradually relaxed as the coffee and warmth worked their magic. Stella noticed how his eyes kept drifting to the family photos on the wall, particularly the one of John in his uniform. "Your husband?" he asked, nodding toward the photo. "Yes," Stella answered simply. "He passed away 5 years ago." Something flickered in Hawk's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes, just nodded and took another sip of coffee. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The storm raged on outside, but within the warm circle of lamplight, 3 strangers sat together, connected by an act of kindness on a dark road. Stella watched as Lily brought their unexpected guest another cup of coffee, noting how his hard exterior seemed to soften just slightly when he thanked her. The pale light of dawn crept through Stella's kitchen windows, painting the worn linoleum floor in soft golden stripes. The storm had finally settled into a gentle drizzle, and the morning air held that fresh, clean scent that only comes after a desert rain. Hawk sat at her small kitchen table, his large frame making the wooden chair look almost child-sized beneath him. His fingers, rough and calloused, wrapped carefully around the delicate coffee mug Stella had given him. The eggs sizzled in the pan as Stella worked quietly at the stove. She'd always found comfort in these morning routines, the familiar movements of cracking eggs, buttering toast, brewing coffee, but today felt different, charged with an uncertain energy that made her movements more deliberate, more aware. From the hallway, Lily watched the scene unfold, her curiosity evident in the way she lingered just out of sight. The floorboard beneath her feet creaked, and Hawk's head turned slightly, acknowledging her presence without making direct eye contact. It was a careful dance of awareness and respect that spoke of someone used to watching his surroundings. "You should join us, Lily," Stella called out, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of Hawk. "No sense in hiding in the hallway." Lily emerged slowly, her pajamas rumpled from sleep, her dark hair twisted into a messy bun. She slid into a chair, keeping one eye on their unusual guest as he began to eat. His movements were measured, controlled, like everything else about him. "Thank you, ma'am," Hawk said quietly, his voice still rough from sleep. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal." Stella sat down with her own plate, studying him over the rim of her coffee cup. In the morning light, she could see the details she'd missed in the darkness. The way his leather vest hung loosely on his frame, suggesting recent weight loss. The silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. The deep lines around his eyes that spoke of more than just age. "Where are you headed?" she asked gently, passing him the salt shaker. Hawk's shoulders tensed slightly, then relaxed with conscious effort. "Nevada, originally," he said after a moment. "But that was before everything." He paused, pushing eggs around his plate. "Now, I'm not sure. Just riding, I guess. Trying to figure things out." "Were you part of a club?" Stella gestured to his vest, where faded patches still clung to the leather. His jaw tightened. "Yeah. Nevada chapter of the Angels. But that's behind me now." The words came out clipped, final, like a door closing. Lily's eyes widened at this revelation, but Stella's expression remained neutral. She'd seen enough in her years as a police officer's wife to know that people's pasts didn't always define their presents. "The rain's supposed to clear up by afternoon," Hawk said, changing the subject. "I'll get out of your hair then. Already imposed enough." Stella shook her head. "You've got a nasty bump on your head, and that bike needs checking over. Stay another night at least until you're steady on your feet." Before Hawk could protest, a sharp creak from the porch made them all look up. "That step's been giving us trouble for months," Stella explained. Hawk's expression shifted slightly, something other than wariness flickering in his eyes. After breakfast, while Stella was washing dishes, she heard the distinct sound of tools being retrieved from a toolbox, the one John had left in the garage. Through the window, she watched as Hawk examined the loose boards of the porch step, his movements sure and practiced. Within an hour, the creak was gone. But Hawk didn't stop there. She found him under the hood of her old pickup truck, hands black with grease as he made adjustments to the engine that had been running rough for weeks. "Used to work as a mechanic," he explained when she brought him water. "Before everything else." The words held weight, hinting at a life that had taken wrong turns somewhere along the way. By mid-morning, Mrs. Patterson from next door was power-walking past the house for the third time, her phone practically glued to her ear as she eyed the massive Harley still parked in Stella's driveway. Stella could practically hear the gossip spreading through their small town, the widow Jensen, harboring a mysterious biker. The day passed in a strange sort of peace, punctuated by the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. Hawk kept himself busy with small repairs, speaking little but watching everything with those alert blue eyes. Stella caught him sometimes, looking at the family photos on the walls, his expression unreadable but somehow lonely. As evening approached, the rain finally began to taper off, leaving behind a chorus of dripping leaves and the sweet smell of wet earth. Hawk sat on the porch steps he'd fixed, staring out at the desert landscape painted in twilight colors. The setting sun caught the silver in his hair, softening his hard edges. Stella stepped out onto the porch, a blanket draped over her arm. The evening air had turned cool, carrying that sharp edge that desert nights were known for. Without a word, she draped the blanket over his shoulders. He accepted it with a slight nod, making room for her on the step. They sat in comfortable silence as the moon rose, full and bright, casting long shadows across the yard. The desert stretched out before them, vast and quiet, holding all their unspoken words in its emptiness. "Why'd you help me?" Hawk finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Most people see someone like me on the side of the road. They keep driving." Stella was quiet for a moment, watching the moonlight paint silver edges on the clouds. "John, my husband, used to say that kindness isn't just something you feel, it's something you do, especially when it's hard." She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Besides, everyone deserves a chance to find their way home." Hawk's hands tightened on the blanket. "Some of us don't have homes anymore," he said roughly. "Maybe home isn't always a place," Stella replied softly. "Sometimes it's just a moment when you stop running." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding, with the weight of lost things and the possibility of found ones. They sat there, two lonely souls under the desert moon, while the last drops of rain fell from the eaves like tears. The desert morning dawned crisp and clear, with no trace of yesterday's storms, except for puddles reflecting the bright Arizona sun. At Sally's diner, the morning crowd buzzed with whispered conversations and sideways glances. The bell above the door chimed as Martha Wilson rushed in, her eyes wide with fresh gossip. "You won't believe who I saw at Stella Jensen's house this morning," she announced to the breakfast regulars. "A massive motorcycle parked right in her driveway, and some rough-looking man fixing things around her property." Sally herself wiped down the counter, her weathered face pinched with concern. "The widow. Jensen took in a biker? Has she lost her mind? After everything with John—" The whispers spread through the diner like wildfire, jumping from booth to booth. "Did you see his tattoos? What would John think? Someone should do something." That someone turned out to be Sheriff Tom Reed. His patrol car pulled up to Stella's house just before noon, gravel crunching under the tires. He adjusted his badge, more out of habit than necessity, before walking up the newly fixed porch steps. Hawk was in the garage, working on Stella's truck again, when he heard the sharp rap of knuckles on the front door. Through the open garage door, he could see the patrol car and felt his muscles tense instinctively. Stella opened the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Tom," she said warmly, though her eyes held a hint of steel. "What brings you by?" The sheriff removed his hat, holding it in both hands. "Just checking in, Stella. Word travels fast in a small town." His voice dropped lower, but still carried to where Hawk stood. "These kinds of men bring attention. The kind John wouldn't want for you and Lily." Hawk's face remained carefully blank as he turned back to the engine, but his hands tightened on the wrench he held. "I appreciate your concern, Tom," Stella replied, her voice firm, "but I'm quite capable of making my own decisions about who stays under my roof." The sheriff sighed, replacing his hat. "Just be careful, Stella. That's all I'm asking." He glanced toward the garage, meeting Hawk's eyes for a long moment before returning to his patrol car. Later that afternoon, Stella announced they needed groceries. "You're coming with us," she told Hawk, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Can't hide in the garage forever." Hawk looked uncertain. "Maybe it's better if I stay here." Nonsense, Lily chimed in, surprising them both. Mom's right. Besides, we need someone tall to reach the top shelves. Her smile was bright and defiant. The local market was busy with after-church shoppers when they arrived. Conversations died as they walked in, replaced by pointed stares and whispered comments. Hawk kept his head down, pushing the cart while Stella consulted her list with determined normalcy. Mrs. Peterson and her bridge club huddled by the produce section, their disapproving glares following Hawk's every move. Of all people, one whispered loudly enough to carry, you'd think Stella Jensen would know better than to bring his kind around here. Lily's cheeks flushed red. His kind? She snapped, turning to face them. You mean someone who fixed our porch and Mom's truck? Someone who says please and thank you and helps with the dishes? Her voice shook with teenage indignation. Maybe you should try getting to know someone before judging them. Stella placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, but her proud smile was unmistakable. Hawk said nothing, quietly loading their groceries into the cart. But Stella could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided meeting anyone's eyes. The drive home was quiet, the bag-filled back seat a barrier between them and the town's judgment. As they unloaded groceries in the kitchen, Hawk finally spoke. You didn't have to do that. Stand up for me, I mean. I'm used to people thinking the worst. Stella paused in putting away cans. Yes, we did. This town… She shook her head. Sometimes they forget that people are more than their pasts. After dinner, with Lily upstairs doing homework, Hawk and Stella sat on the porch again. The desert night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the black sky. I rode with the Hells Angels, Hawk said suddenly, his voice rough. 8 years in Nevada. It wasn't just bikes and brotherhood like they claim. Did things I'm not proud of. He stared out into the darkness. My little brother Tommy followed me in. Thought it was glamorous, exciting. He was killed in a territory dispute with another gang. 23 years old. Stella listened quietly, her presence steady and unjudging. I left after that. Just got on my bike one day and never went back. Been drifting ever since, trying to… He trailed off, searching for words. Find redemption? Stella offered softly. Hawk's laugh was bitter. Is there such a thing? For men like me? Everyone deserves a second chance, Stella said firmly. Everyone, Hawk, no exceptions. He turned to look at her then, and in the porch light, she could see the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the desperate want to believe her words. Something shifted in him, like a wall beginning to crack, letting in the first rays of hope. The crickets sang in the darkness, a desert lullaby accompanying their silence. The stars wheeled overhead, witnesses to the quiet miracle of understanding between two wounded souls and the first tentative steps toward healing. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement of Miller's Market parking lot. Stella pushed her empty cart toward her truck, keys jingling in her hand. The day had been quiet. Too quiet, like the desert air before a storm. Mrs. Jensen, a sharp voice cut through the silence. We need to talk. Stella turned to see Doug Bailey striding toward her, his face flushed with anger beneath his pressed collar. The town councilman's normally neat appearance seemed disheveled, his tie loose around his neck. Mr. Bailey, Stella acknowledged, keeping her voice level. She'd known this confrontation was coming. Doug had lost his son Jason to gang violence 3 years ago, a tragedy that had turned his grief into a crusade. What do you think you're doing? Harboring that criminal? Doug's voice carried across the parking lot, drawing curious looks from shoppers. That man is Hell's Angels. Do you understand what that means? Stella squared her shoulders. I understand that he's a human being who needed help. Help? Doug's laugh was bitter. These men don't need help. They need jail cells. They destroy lives, tear families apart. His voice cracked. My son, my Jason, was killed by men just like him. I remember Jason, Doug, Stella said softly, and I'm truly sorry for your loss, but Hawk isn't… Hawk? Doug spat the name like poison. Even his name is a lie. These men are predators, Stella. They come into decent towns, bring their violence, their drugs. That's enough. Stella's voice turned to steel. You don't know him. You haven't even tried. I know his kind. Doug stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward her. And you're putting this whole town at risk by harboring criminals. What would John think? The mention of her late husband stung, but Stella held her ground. John believed in seeing the good in people, in giving second chances. Maybe you've forgotten that, Doug, but I haven't. You're being naive, Doug growled. Or worse, willfully blind. Mark my words, this will end badly, for all of us. Stella turned away, hands shaking as she unlocked her truck. I won't apologize for showing kindness, Doug. Not to you, not to anyone. The drive home was a blur. By the time Stella pulled into her driveway, tears burned behind her eyes. She sat in the truck for several long moments, trying to steady her breathing. When she walked inside, Hawk took one look at her face and knew. He was already reaching for his jacket. I'll pack my things. What? No. I heard about Doug Bailey's son, Hawk said quietly. He's right to be angry. I can't stay here and keep causing you trouble. You're not causing anything, Stella protested. They are, with their prejudice and fear. Hawk shook his head. Your reputation in this town matters. Your life here matters. I won't be the reason it gets ruined. You leave, and they win, Stella said firmly. Is that what you want? For fear to keep winning? Before Hawk could respond, a low rumble filled the air. At first, it seemed like distant thunder, but it grew steadily louder, more mechanical. Stella's heart stuttered in her chest as she moved to the window. Headlights pierced the gathering dusk, dozens of them, then hundreds, emerging from the desert road like a swarm of mechanical fireflies. The rumble became a roar as motorcycle after motorcycle appeared, their riders' leather-clad shadows in the fading light. No, Hawk whispered, his face draining of color. No, no, no! He rushed outside, Stella following. The bikes kept coming, filling the road, circling her property like a dark tide. Their engines growled in unison, a sound like rolling thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. What's happening? Stella asked, though she already knew. Word got out, Hawk said, his voice hollow. Through the old network, they heard a brother was being harassed for taking refuge. He ran a hand through his hair, desperation evident in every movement. I never meant for this to follow me. Never wanted to bring this to your door. By sunset, nearly 2,000 motorcycles had gathered, their riders silent, sentinels forming a ring around Stella's property. The message was clear. Touch one of ours, and you deal with all of us. Lights began appearing in neighboring houses as people peered out their windows. Cars slowed on the main road, then hurriedly turned around. Fear spread through the town like wildfire. The very thing Doug Bailey had warned about had manifested, but not in the way he'd predicted. Lily came out onto the porch, her eyes wide. Mom? It's okay, sweetheart, Stella said, though her own heart was racing. Everything's okay. The bikers didn't move, didn't speak. They simply sat there, engines idling, an army of shadows in the growing darkness. Their presence was both protection and threat, a reminder of the world Hawk had tried to leave behind. Stella stood on her porch, the light she never turned off casting a warm glow around her. She looked out at the sea of bikes and leather, at the fear they represented to her neighbors, at the family they represented to Hawk. In that moment, she understood something profound about redemption. How it was never simple, never clean, how the past didn't let go easily, even when you were ready to let go of it. Hawk stood beside her, his head bowed, the weight of his old life heavy on his shoulders. "I never meant for this," he whispered again, the words barely audible over the rumble of engines. "I never meant to bring this chaos into your life." The desert night grew darker around them, the stars hidden behind clouds, as if even they were afraid to witness what would unfold. The engines continued their ominous chorus, a reminder that sometimes the path to redemption wasn't just about the choices you made, but about the life you left behind, and how it refused to let go without a fight. Dawn crept over the desert landscape, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. But the usual peace of morning was shattered by a cacophony of activity that had descended upon their small town. Stella stood at her kitchen window, coffee cup warming her hands, watching the chaos unfold. 3 news vans with satellite dishes had parked along her street, their crews setting up cameras and checking microphones. Police cruisers blocked the main roads leading to her property, their lights flashing silently in the early morning light. Through the window, she could see her driveway lined with leather-clad bikers. They sat on their motorcycles or stood in small groups, many holding steaming coffee mugs she'd provided. Cigarette smoke curled lazily in the morning air as they talked quietly among themselves. Despite their intimidating appearance, they maintained a surprisingly peaceful presence. "More coffee?" Lily asked, holding up the pot. "Yes, please." Stella held out her cup, watching as her daughter moved with surprising ease among their unusual guests. "How many pots have we made now?" "I lost count after 6, Lily said with a small laugh. "But they've been really nice about helping make more." Hawk entered. Through the back door, his expression tight with concern. "I've talked to the guys. They're not going anywhere until they know we're safe." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm so sorry about all this, Stella. I never meant—" "Stop apologizing," Stella interrupted gently. "Tell me what's really going on here." Hawk leaned against the counter, accepting the cup of coffee Lily offered. "They came because word spread that one of their own was being harassed for accepting help. In their world, that's not just an insult to me. It's an insult to the kindness you showed." He looked down at his cup. "These men, they might seem rough, but they understand loyalty and protection better than most." A knock at the door made them all turn. Sheriff Tom Reed stood on the porch, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Come in, Tom," Stella called out. "We're just having breakfast." The sheriff entered, his eyes sweeping the kitchen before settling on Hawk. "There are rumors of a riot brewing," he said without preamble. "The whole town's in an uproar." "Then let me ease your mind," Stella said, pulling out a chair. "Sit, have some eggs and coffee with us." Tom hesitated, then slowly sat down. Lily brought him a plate and cup, while Stella served up scrambled eggs and toast. "You're taking an awful risk here, Stella," Tom said quietly. "These men—" "Our guests who haven't caused any trouble," she interrupted. "The only chaos I've seen is from the news crews and frightened townspeople." Hawk cleared his throat. "Sheriff, I give you my word. No one here wants violence. They came because they heard someone was trying to drive me out simply for accepting help when I needed it." "Kindness doesn't come with conditions," Stella added firmly, meeting Tom's concerned gaze. "My husband taught me that, and I won't dishonor his memory by turning away someone in need just because others disapprove." Outside, the sound of a motorcycle engine revving drew their attention. Through the window they could see Lily in the side yard, sitting on a small dirt bike. A woman in her 40s with long, gray-streaked hair was showing her how to operate the controls. "That's Maria," Hawk explained, seeing the sheriff's expression. "She's been riding longer than I have. Your daughter asked about learning, and Maria offered to teach her the basics." They watched as Lily slowly rode in careful circles, Maria walking alongside, giving instructions. The girl's laughter carried through the window, bright and uninhibited. "Look at them, Tom," Stella said softly. "Does that look like a riot waiting to happen?" The sheriff sighed, taking a long drink of his coffee. "No," he admitted. "But you have to understand how this looks to people who've only seen the dangerous side of motorcycle clubs." "Maybe it's time they saw another side," Stella suggested. "These people came here out of loyalty and protection, not to cause trouble." As the day progressed, an unusual rhythm developed. The bikers maintained their vigilant presence, but helped Stella with small tasks around the property. They fixed her fence, cleared weeds from her garden, and even helped an elderly neighbor jumpstart her car. By evening, news crews were filming these unexpected acts of kindness instead of the riot they'd anticipated. Stella sat on her porch, watching as Maria continued Lily's riding lessons, while other bikers offered advice and encouragement. "Your daughter's a natural," a gruff voice said. Stella looked up to see one of the older bikers. He'd introduced himself as Bear earlier, settling into the chair beside her. "She's fearless," Stella agreed. "Always has been." "Like her mama," Bear said with a knowing smile. "Not many would stand their ground like you have." The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the yard. Stella watched as groups of bikers set up small camping areas along her property line, their presence no longer filling her with anxiety but rather a strange sense of security. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I first saw all of you arriving last night, I was terrified. But now—" She gestured to where Lily was chatting animatedly with Maria and a group of other riders. "Now I'm seeing something different. You're not just a gang. You're a community." "Family," Bear corrected gently. "We're family. And you showed kindness to one of ours when others wouldn't. That makes you family too, whether you want it or not." As darkness settled over the desert, the atmosphere had transformed from tense standoff to something almost festive. Small campfires dotted the property, their warm light competing with Stella's ever-present porch light. The sound of quiet conversations and occasional laughter replaced the threatening rumble of engines from the night before. Hawk joined them on the porch, his expression more relaxed than it had been in days. "The sheriff just left," he reported. "Seems satisfied we're not planning any trouble." "Good," Stella said, then added with a smile. "Though I think Lily might cause some trouble if Maria tries to take that dirt bike back." Their laughter joined the nighttime chorus of crickets and distant conversations, a harmony of unlikely connections forged in the face of prejudice and fear. Stella looked out at the gathering of leather-clad protectors. These people society had taught her to fear, and saw instead a reflection of the very values she held dear: loyalty, protection, and the unshakable belief that family wasn't always about blood. The desert night enveloped them in its gentle darkness, while Stella's porch light continued its steadfast vigil, now illuminating not just her own path home, but a broader understanding of what community truly meant. The desert morning brought a gentle breeze and new possibilities. Hawk stood at the entrance of the rundown rest stop, surveying the work ahead. Beer bottles littered the ground, and graffiti covered the weathered walls. Behind him, 24 bikers waited for instructions, their leather vests glinting in the early sun. "All right, brothers," Hawk called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Let's show this town what we can do." They worked through the morning heat, clearing trash and scrubbing walls, the rhythmic sound of brooms against concrete mixed with good-natured banter. When a police cruiser rolled by, The officers inside looked surprised to see the feared motorcycle club wielding cleaning supplies instead of weapons. Back at Stella's house, she stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of fresh coffee and baking bread. Her phone pressed to her ear. She spoke earnestly to Sarah Martinez, the church's hospitality coordinator. "I know it's unexpected," Stella said, "but these men need proper meals. They're doing good work in our community." There was a long pause before Sarah responded. I'll talk to the other ladies. But Stella, you understand how people feel. Come see for yourself," Stella urged. "Just for an hour." By afternoon, 5 churchwomen arrived cautiously with casseroles and pies. They hung back at first, watching from Stella's porch as the bikers returned from the rest stop, dusty and tired. Maria, the biker who'd been teaching Lily to ride, approached them first. "That smells amazing," she said warmly. "My grandmother used to make something similar." The ice began to thaw as the women served food and listened to stories. Children from neighboring houses crept closer, drawn by curiosity and the sight of so many impressive motorcycles. One small boy, no more than 7 years old, stood at the fence, eyes wide with wonder. A biker named Joey noticed him and walked over. "Hey, little man, want to see my bike?" The boy's mother appeared instantly, protective, but Joey just smiled. "Ma'am, I teach motorcycle safety to kids back home. Would you like to join us?" As the week progressed, more subtle changes emerged. Hawk set up a makeshift repair shop in Stella's driveway, focusing on helping local veterans with their motorcycles. Word spread quickly through the VFW hall, and soon aging veterans arrived on various bikes, many barely running. "My pension doesn't cover repairs anymore," explained George Wilson, a Vietnam veteran with weathered hands and proud posture. Hawk listened, then spent 3 hours fixing the man's vintage Harley, refusing payment. "My brother served," was all Hawk said, his voice thick with memory. "This is how I honor him." The transformation continued when Mike Thompson, owner of Thompson's Auto Repair, stopped by to watch Hawk work. Initially skeptical, he found himself impressed by Hawk's expertise. "The playground equipment at the park's been broken for months," Mike mentioned casually. "Town can't afford repairs." Hawk looked up from the engine he was working on. "Got tools?" The next day, they worked together in the park, welding broken swings and reinforcing rusty supports. Children gathered to watch, their parents hovering nearby with a mix of concern and curiosity. When the work was done, laughter filled the air as kids swarmed the restored playground. Stella watched all this from various vantage points throughout the week. She saw Hawk's gentle patience with veterans, his quiet leadership among the bikers, his skillful hands fixing what was broken. Each moment revealed another layer of the man beneath the leather and tattoos. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Stella found herself studying his profile. "You remind me of John sometimes," she said softly. Hawk turned, surprised. "Your husband?" He believed everyone deserved a chance to be better than their past. She smiled at a distant memory. "He would have liked you." The moment was interrupted by angry voices from the street. Doug Bailey stood there with several townspeople, their faces hard with judgment. "This has gone on long enough," Doug shouted. "These criminals need to leave before something happens." Hawk started to rise, but Stella placed a gentle hand on his arm. "They're afraid," she said quietly. "Fear makes people forget their own capacity for grace." Sunday morning arrived with golden light and the sound of church bells. Stella sat in her usual pew, aware of the whispers around her. When the pastor asked for testimonies, she stood slowly, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I want to talk about forgiveness," she began. "Not the easy kind that comes when someone accidentally cuts you off in traffic. The hard kind. the kind that requires us to look past our fears and see the person God created. The church fell silent as she continued. My husband, John, believed that grace wasn't just a gift we receive, but a responsibility we carry. This past week, I've watched a man whose society labeled dangerous help veterans, fix playgrounds, and teach safety to our children. Her eyes met various faces in the congregation. Hawk may have a difficult past, but his actions show a heart seeking redemption. John would have seen that. He would have offered friendship instead of fear. Some people nodded slowly. Others looked thoughtful. But Doug Bailey stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor as he stormed out, the church door slamming behind him. In the quiet that followed, an elderly woman named Ruth Wheeler stood up. "I've been watching, too," she said. "Those bikers helped my grandson fix his bicycle yesterday. Maybe we've been too quick to judge." After the service, people lingered longer than usual, talking in small groups. Some approached Stella to share their own observations of positive changes in the community. The fear wasn't gone, but something had shifted, like the first crack in a frozen river before the spring thaw. As Stella walked home, she remembered John's favorite saying, "Grace isn't about deserving, it's about becoming." Looking ahead, she could see Hawk working on another veteran's motorcycle. In her driveway, his movements careful and precise. Around him, children watched in fascination while their parents stood nearby, no longer pulling them away in fear. The idea came to Stella one morning as she drove past the charred remains of the old youth center. The building had burned down last winter, leaving a skeleton of blackened beams against the desert sky. She pulled over, studying the ruins as tumbleweeds danced across the empty parking lot. That evening, she found Hawk working on his motorcycle in her garage. "I have a proposal," she said, sitting on an overturned bucket. "Something that could change everything." Hawk wiped his hands on a rag, giving her his full attention. His eyes were cautious but curious. "The youth center," she began. "It's been sitting there broken for months. What if we organized a charity ride to rebuild it? Bikers and townspeople working together, showing everyone what's possible when we put aside our differences." Hawk's expression tightened. "Stella, these folks barely tolerate us now. You really think they'll want to work alongside us?" "They might surprise you," she said softly. "Like you surprised me." Lily burst into the garage, excitement radiating from her face. "Mom, that's brilliant! I can help with social media, make posters. We could call it Ride for Renewal." Despite his hesitation, Hawk couldn't help smiling at her enthusiasm. "You really think this could work?" Stella stood, her voice firm. "I believe in second chances, for buildings and people alike." The next morning, Stella presented her idea to the town council. Some members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Mayor Richardson leaned forward with interest. "The insurance money's been sitting in an account," he admitted, "but we need more than funds. We need labor, materials, community support." "That's exactly what we're offering," Stella replied. "These bikers have skills, construction, electrical work, welding. They want to help." Over the next week, the transformation began. Bikers in leather vests worked alongside local contractors, clearing debris and salvaging what could be saved. Women from the church brought sandwiches and lemonade. Children watched wide-eyed as tattooed arms lifted heavy beams and skilled hands repaired broken windows. Hawk threw himself into the work, coordinating teams and solving problems. Stella watched him bloom under the responsibility, his natural leadership emerging without the edge of his past. Even Doug Bailey's son, Tommy, started hanging around, fascinated by the motorcycles and the men who rode them. "My dad says you're dangerous," Tommy told Hawk one afternoon while helping sort lumber. Hawk paused, choosing his words carefully. "I used to be, but someone taught me there's better ways to live." His eyes met Stella's across the worksite, and she felt warmth spread through her chest. The morning of the ride dawned clear and cool. Main Street transformed with colorful banners reading, "One town, one heart," stretched between lampposts. The smell of barbecue filled the air as local restaurants set up food stations. Someone had brought speakers, and country music mixed with the rumble of arriving motorcycles. Stella stood in front of her mirror, pinning up her silver hair. Lily bounced into the room wearing a borrowed leather jacket, her eyes sparkling. "Mom, you have to see this." She grabbed Stella's hand, pulling her to the window. Hundreds of motorcycles lined the street, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. But what made Stella's breath catch was the sight of townspeople mingling with the bikers, sharing coffee, comparing bikes, laughing together. Hawk knocked on her doorframe, looking uncertain in clean jeans and a pressed shirt. "Ready?" They drove to the starting point in Stella's truck. Lily perched in the truck bed with a camera. The procession would ride through town to the youth center site, where the groundbreaking ceremony would take place. Mayor Richardson approached Hawk with an outstretched hand. "We'd be honored if you'd lead the ride." Hawk's shoulders straightened as he shook the mayor's hand. He swung onto his motorcycle, the engine's rumble echoing off the desert mountains. Stella and Lily followed in the truck, waving as children ran alongside them. The procession wound through town like a chrome river. People stood on porches and sidewalks, many holding signs of support. Even the retirement home residents had wheeled themselves outside to watch, their aged faces bright with excitement. At the youth center site, tables groaned with potluck dishes. The air filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. Stella watched as Tommy Bailey tugged his reluctant father toward a group of bikers, showing kids how to safely sit on their parked motorcycles. When it was time for speeches, Stella felt her hands trembling as she took the microphone. Looking out at the crowd, bikers and townspeople standing shoulder to shoulder, her voice grew strong with conviction. "Healing starts when we open our doors," she said, "when we choose to see past our fears to the humanity we share. This building will rise again, but something even more important is being rebuilt today, our faith in each other." She found Hawk in the crowd, saw the moisture in his eyes as he nodded slowly. He understood what she meant. This wasn't just about a building. It was about redemption, about finding purpose in helping others heal. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Children played tag between parked motorcycles while their parents shared stories over paper plates. The Brotherhood members taught impromptu mechanics lessons to interested teenagers. Someone started line dancing, and soon bikers were attempting to two-step with church ladies, everyone laughing at their missteps. As the sun began to set, Hawk found Stella sitting alone on the tailgate of her truck, watching the celebration. "You did this," he said, quietly, sitting beside her. She shook her head. "We all did this. Sometimes people just need permission to be their better selves." "You gave me that permission," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Showed me I could be more than my mistakes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Lily taught a group of bikers and local kids a TikTok dance, their awkward attempts filling the air with joy. The youth center's foundation had been poured that morning, solid and strong, ready for whatever would be built upon it. The desert night settled over the town like a velvet blanket, stars twinkling above the scattered remains of the day's celebration. Paper plates and forgotten banners rustled in the evening breeze. Most of the bikers had moved to the campground outside town, their distant laughter carried on the wind. Stella sat on her porch swing, contentment warming her heart as she remembered the day's victories. Inside, Lily was showing Hawk old photo albums, sharing stories about her dad. The peaceful moment felt like a gift, one Stella wanted to wrap her arms around and hold tight. But peace, like desert rain, can vanish in an instant. The first hint of trouble came as a shadow moving through the darkness. Doug Bailey stumbled across Stella's property, whiskey bottle glinting in the moonlight. His face was twisted with grief and rage, decades of pain fueled by alcohol and bitterness. "You've ruined everything," he muttered, fumbling with something in his jacket pocket. "Made a mockery of Tommy's death." The scratch of a match broke the silence. Stella dozed lightly on the porch swing, dreaming of motorcycles and healing hearts, when the acrid smell of smoke jerked her awake. Orange flames licked the night sky, turning her old barn into a torch against the darkness. "Fire!" she screamed, running toward the inferno. "Hawk! The barn's on fire!" Hawk burst from the house, covering his mouth with his shirt as he charged toward the flames. The heat was intense, making the air shimmer. Inside the barn, stored hay fed the fire, creating a roaring furnace. "The horses!" Stella cried, remembering the 2 rescue horses she boarded for the local shelter. Hawk didn't hesitate. He disappeared into the blazing doorway, emerging moments later leading 2 terrified horses. After getting them to safety, he grabbed the garden hose, fighting the flames even as smoke filled his lungs. "Mom!" Lily appeared beside Stella, phone in hand. "I called 911. Sirens wailed in the distance as Hawk battled the fire. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with soot. He coughed violently but refused to stop, desperately trying to save what he could of Stella's property. The smoke became too much. Hawk swayed, then collapsed to his knees, still gripping the hose. Stella rushed to his side, supporting him as he gasped for air. Sheriff Tom Reed's cruiser skidded into the driveway, followed by fire trucks. The scene before him was chaos. The barn engulfed in flames, Hawk covered in soot, Stella trying to help him breathe. "Step away from him, Stella," Tom ordered, drawing his weapon. "What? Tom, he was trying to... Now, Stella." The sheriff's voice was hard. "Hawk Merritt, you're under arrest for arson." "No," Stella protested, as 2 deputies pulled Hawk to his feet, roughly cuffing his hands behind his back. "He was fighting the fire, not starting it. Tom, please listen." But the sheriff's mind was made up. Years of prejudice and fear clouded his judgment, making him see what he expected to see. A dangerous biker causing trouble, just as everyone had warned. Word spread quickly. Police cars blocked the road, forcing the gathering bikers to disperse. The Brotherhood watched helplessly as one of their own was led away, their faces dark with anger and disappointment. "You can't do this," Stella pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "He's innocent." Hawk caught her eye as they put him in the patrol car. "It's okay, Stella," he said softly. "Thank you for believing in me." The fire department eventually extinguished the flames, but by then the barn was nothing more than a smoking skeleton against the star-filled sky. The acrid smell of burned wood and destroyed dreams hung heavy in the air. Lily hugged her mother as they watched the police cars drive away. "What do we do now?" Stella couldn't answer. Her heart felt as charred as the ruins before her. Dawn brought news crews and curious onlookers. Headlines screamed, "Biker violence returns to peaceful town," and "Charity ride leader arrested in barn burning." The fragile trust built over the past weeks crumbled like ash in the wind. Stella sat alone on her porch, the morning sun doing nothing to warm the chill in her soul. The porch light still burned, though its bulb flickered wearily, as if sharing her exhaustion. She thought of Hawk in a jail cell, bearing the weight of others' prejudice, of Doug Bailey's haunted eyes and the poison of unresolved grief, of her own late husband's belief that truth would always surface, like spring water through desert rock. Her fingers found her worn silver cross, and she closed her eyes. Lord, she whispered through tears, don't let this be the end of him. Show us the way through this darkness. The barn's remains smoldered in the morning light, a stark reminder of how quickly hope can turn to ashes. But as Stella watched the sun climb higher, she remembered something her husband used to say. The darkest hour comes just before dawn. She prayed those words would prove true now, when they needed light most of all. The porch light flickered again, but didn't go out. Like Stella's faith, it held on, a small beacon of hope in the gathering storm. The county jail's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Hawk's face as Stella settled into the metal chair. Through the thick glass between them, his eyes looked hollow, defeated. 5 days had passed since the fire, but the weight of accusation seemed to have aged him years. You shouldn't keep coming here, Hawk said into the phone receiver, his voice rough. People will talk. Let them, Stella replied firmly. She pressed her hand against the glass, wishing she could reach through and shake some fight back into him. We both know you didn't do this. Hawk's shoulders slumped. Maybe this is karma catching up with me. All those years running with the wrong crowd, doing things I'm not proud of. He shook his head. Maybe this is exactly where I belong. Stop it, Stella said sharply. The man who fixed playground equipment for children and helped veterans with their vehicles doesn't belong behind bars. But Hawk just stared at his hands, calloused from years of working on engines. I'm tired, Stella. Tired of running from my past. Tired of trying to prove I'm something different than what people see. The resignation in his voice broke her heart, but it also sparked something fierce inside her. She wouldn't let him give up, not after seeing the good he was capable of doing. Back home, Stella started making calls. The local mechanic, Bill Turner, remembered how Hawk had stayed late helping him fix Mrs. Thompson's car when she couldn't afford repairs. 3 veterans spoke about how Hawk had restored their motorcycles free of charge, treating their service with genuine respect. He didn't just fix our bikes, one veteran told her, voice cracking. He listened to our stories. That means something. Lily threw herself into the cause with teenage determination. She started a petition at school, explaining how Hawk had helped transform the town's attitude during the charity ride. To her surprise, many students remembered him teaching them about motorcycle safety during the event. Mom, look! Lily burst through the door one afternoon, waving papers. 237 signatures. Even Mr. Rodriguez, the principal, signed it. The bikers' wives proved to be unexpected allies. They shared stories of Hawk's kindness, how he'd helped one woman escape an abusive relationship, how he'd mentored troubled teens in Nevada, teaching them mechanics instead of violence. He was always the one trying to keep peace, Sarah, one of the wives, explained over coffee at Stella's kitchen table. When others wanted revenge, Hawk would say violence only breeds more violence. Meanwhile, across town, Doug Bailey couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flames he'd set, heard the horses' terrified whinnies. The whiskey bottle that had given him courage that night now mocked him from his trash can. His neighbor, Martha Wilson, had called him that morning. Doug, she'd said hesitantly, my security camera, it shows you walking past my house toward Stella's property that night. Around 11:15. The words had hit him like a physical blow. Evidence. Proof of what alcohol and bitterness had driven him to do. Doug sat in his darkened living room, staring at photos of his son. The boy's smile, frozen in time, seemed to judge him now. What would his son think of what he'd become? A man so consumed by grief, he'd let it turn him into the very thing he hated. Someone who hurt others. The collection of testimonies grew on Stella's kitchen table. Stories of quiet kindness, of a man trying to rebuild himself through helping others. She organized them carefully, building a case for Hawk's character that couldn't be ignored. "The truth will come out," she told Lily, as they sorted through the papers. "Your father always said that justice might work slowly, but it works surely." Each day, Stella visited Hawk, sharing stories of support from the community. Though he tried to maintain his resigned demeanor, she caught glimpses of hope flickering in his eyes. Like her porch light, it refused to go out completely. "People remember the good you've done," she told him. "They remember the man who chose to help rebuild rather than tear down." Through the glass, Hawk's fingers brushed where hers rested on the barrier. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The touch said everything about trust, about believing in second chances, about refusing to let darkness win. Outside the jail, storm clouds gathered over the desert mountains. But inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. One made of truth, justice, and the power of a community discovering that sometimes heroes come in unexpected packages, wearing leather instead of shining armor. Martha Wilson's security camera footage made its way to Sheriff Tom Reed's desk early Tuesday morning. The grainy black and white video showed Doug Bailey, stumbling but determined, making his way down the street toward Stella's property at 11:15 that night. There was no mistaking his distinctive limp or the gas can swinging from his hand. Tom sat in his office for a long while, the weight of duty heavy on his shoulders. Finally, he drove to Doug's house, finding the councilman sitting alone in his darkened living room. "Want to tell me about that night, Doug?" Tom asked quietly, setting the footage on the coffee table. Doug's face crumpled. His hands shook as he covered his eyes, decades of pain finally breaking through. "I wanted him to pay," he sobbed, his voice raw. "I wanted that biker to feel what I felt when I lost my boy. The whiskey, it made it seem right somehow." "Doug," Tom said gently, "this isn't what your son would have wanted." The confession spread through town like wildfire. People who had pointed fingers at Hawk now couldn't meet each other's eyes. The diner grew quiet when Doug's name was mentioned, shame replacing the earlier self-righteousness. Stella heard the news while preparing dinner. She sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed with relief, and whispered a prayer of thanks. "Lord, you knew the truth all along. Thank you for bringing it to light." The next morning, she visited Hawk. His hands, rough from years of mechanical work, felt warm through the cell bars. She held them tightly, looking into his eyes. "You're not a curse," she said softly, her voice full of certainty. "You're the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was praying." Hawk's eyes filled with tears, something deep and wounded finally beginning to heal. "Then maybe," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I can still make things right." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the county jail's concrete steps as Sheriff Tom Reed personally escorted Hawk outside. The heavy metal door clanged shut behind them, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. What Hawk saw next made him stop in his tracks. Along the highway, stretching as far as he could see, hundreds of motorcycles idled in perfect formation. Between them stood townspeople holding handmade signs reading "Forgiveness Rides" and "Unity Starts Here." Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving small flags. "What is all this?" Hawk asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stella's been busy," Tom said with a smile. "She calls it the Ride for Forgiveness." There at the front, sitting in the bed of her old pickup truck decorated with streamers, was Stella herself. Her gray hair caught the sunlight as she waved, her eyes shining with joy and purpose. Hawk's own motorcycle, freshly washed and polished, waited for him. His leather jacket hung over the seat, looking newer somehow. As he slipped it on, the familiar weight felt different, lighter maybe, or more purposeful. The roar of engines filled the air as Hawk mounted his bike. Each thundering exhaust pipe seemed to speak of second chances and new beginnings. Stella's truck pulled out front, leading the way as hundreds of bikes fell into formation behind them. Near the edge of town, Doug Bailey stood alone by the roadside. His shoulders were slumped, his face etched with remorse. As Hawk approached, their eyes met. Time seemed to slow. Hawk gave a single, deliberate nod, not of anger or victory, but of understanding and forgiveness. Doug's eyes welled with tears as he slowly nodded back. The procession wound its way through town toward the newly rebuilt youth center. Where charred ruins had stood just weeks ago, fresh paint now gleamed. Children played on new equipment, while parents and bikers mingled on the lawn, sharing stories and laughter. The sound of motorcycles transformed into something beautiful, a symphony of healing, of barriers broken down, of grace freely given and received. The desert summer mellowed into autumn, bringing with it a gentle transformation of the small Arizona town. Weeks passed like pages turning in a well-loved book, each day writing its own story of healing and growth. The youth center buzzed with new life. Children's laughter echoed through freshly painted hallways, where teenagers gathered after school to study or play basketball. Veterans, some still wearing their old service patches, found sanctuary in the quiet corner Hawk had designed specially for them, complete with comfortable chairs and a coffee station that was always full. Lily Jensen had bloomed in these weeks of change. Under Hawk's patient guidance, she mastered the art of motorcycle riding, starting with careful circuits in empty parking lots and graduating to confident runs on quiet desert roads. Stella watched from the sidelines, her initial worry giving way to pride as her daughter's skills grew stronger. "Mom, did you see that turn?" Lily would call out, her face glowing with achievement. "Hawk says I'm a natural." The mention of Hawk's name brought a bittersweet smile to Stella's face. She'd seen it coming, the restlessness in his eyes, the way he'd stare off into the distance during their evening talks on the porch. Some souls needed to keep moving, to spread their light further. One quiet evening, as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of purple and gold, Hawk shared his plans. He'd been working with a group of veterans, listening to their stories, understanding their struggles. The idea had grown from there. A non-profit organization dedicated to helping at-risk veterans find their way back to civilian life. "It's because of you, Miss Stella," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You showed me what one person's kindness can do, how it can change everything." The night before his departure, they sat together on the porch where their unlikely friendship had begun. The air was cool and sweet with desert sage, crickets providing their familiar evening chorus. Hawk's motorcycle stood packed and ready in the driveway, a testament to the journey ahead. "You gave me a home, Miss Stella," Hawk said softly, looking out at the darkening horizon. "Now I'm going to give others one too." Stella's heart swelled with a mother's pride, though he wasn't her son. She pulled him into a tight hug, feeling tears gather in her eyes. This man who had arrived broken and weary was leaving whole and purposeful. In her mind, no greater miracle existed. "You'll always have a home here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't forget that." Morning came too soon. As Hawk's motorcycle roared to life in the pink dawn light, Lily ran out to give him one last hug. He handed her a small package, maintenance tools for her own bike, wrapped in brown paper and care. The sound of his engine grew fainter as he disappeared into the desert horizon, becoming one with the morning mist. Stella stood watching long after he'd gone, feeling not loss but completion. She reached over and switched on the porch light, though the sun was already rising. The gentle click of the switch felt different now. What had once been a widow's vigil, a light left burning for a husband who would never return, had transformed into something new. It was now a beacon of hope, a reminder that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Stella walked back inside, settling into her favorite chair beside her well-worn Bible. Through the window, she could see the desert, awakening to another day, full of possibility. Looking up at the brightening sky, she smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you for sending him. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.